Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Image and Wire Show. My name is Jake Fisher. I'm the host of the show, and we have an excellent episode for you all today. We have two of the clinical and technology leaders from University Radiology Group, Dr. Roger Yang and Alberto Goldszal. They have really amazing insights into leading a thriving practice and how to achieve that leadership both through the technology side and the clinical side. And I'm really pumped to share that with you all today. So Alberto, Dr. Yang, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
It's really good to have you here. To start us off, can you just share a little bit about yourselves and University of Radiology and what you do over there?
Alberto, why don't I go first? Then we can have you talk about yourself, and then we'll go into our group, right? So hi, everybody. I'm Roger Yang. I'm a physician radiologist, fellowship trained in mammography and women's imaging. Now, I have a circuitous route to this sort of tech side of the practice. In my experience, I've had 20 years of mostly governance, advocacy, and leadership. I've been a chairman of a community hospital in radiology. I'm an ACR counselor, state society president. I was president of the medical staff of our local hospital for a little while. I was also president and the lead of a medium-sized radiology group, which merged into this larger group URG about 6 years ago. So, I'm kind of used to going through all sorts of committees and operations and business. And certainly we've had our experience in advocacy through mammography in particular, breast density legislation, tomosynthesis legislation. I've been in Trenton talking to the legislators about all sorts of different things. So in the end, I'm coming at this from sort of the quality and governance and leadership side of the install of artificial intelligence into a clinical practice. I look at this mostly from a quality and consistency lens. All those aforementioned roles, I've served on quality committees within the organization, as well as outside entities such as ACOs, the accountable care organizations, which bring in people like me to talk about, well, how and what can we do to improve our patient quality, improve our patient care. So I certainly don't consider myself a computer science oriented AI user. That's why Dr. Goldszal is here to be the ham and egg here with me, and I'll give the floor to him.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm an engineer by training, and both in bachelor's and graduate school. And I finished my graduate work in the 90s, and primarily involved with digital image processing, not necessarily medical imaging. Actually, at the time, a lot of satellite imaging processing. But quickly after my training, I shifted to medical imaging, and have been involved throughout the 90s and early 2000s in the thriving business of medical imaging radiology. Actually, most of the departments that I have been through, medical image processing was one of the leading research areas of those departments of radiology. Very well funded by NIH and other entities. And my field was primarily in biomedical image analysis. And back then, we had AI all along the way, and AI very broadly defined, right? More specifically, machine learning, and more recently, what we define as deep learning, which is the AI that everybody talked about. But in the beginning, we always process medical images, and perhaps using more traditional algorithmic solutions, not necessarily data-driven, but it was more algebraic-driven solutions that you could write a code to detect a tumor or to find an abnormality, and so forth and so on. More recently, we have all shifted as an industry, I think, to data-driven models because there's a convergence, right, of technologies and systems and processes that facilitated that. Now we have today, you can download TensorFlow, and then you can go and buy some GPUs, and all of a sudden you're a data scientist, and you can really propel the field forward. And of course, we follow the same trends. But I don't want to leave the audience with the impression that AI is new and just was recently invented. It has been there all along, but there was some practicality to develop data-driven models 20 years ago with the technology that we had then. Computers were expensive, bandwidth was not there. And then only after evolution of the field that you're seeing now this real boom in the what's so-called the deep learning. But machine learning has been radiology from the beginning. As I mentioned, a thriving field, both in the research area as well as in the clinical field. We have had CAD in mammography for 20 plus years, right? So that was my background, and I have been at University Radiology for the past 15 years as Chief Information Officer, and also like Dr. Young, we have faculty appointments in our case at Rutgers, Robert Wood Johnson Medical School as well.
I have a whole bunch of questions about the AI side. Before we jump into that, I don't know whether I love that analogy, the ham and egg. So whether the ham or the egg wants to explain University Radiology and your practice, and I'd love to just learn a little bit more about that, and then we can jump into kind of deeper into the AI adoption stuff.
Yeah, now with the consolidation of radiology and medicine in general, I'm sure many of the physicians who are looking at this say, well, what is this group that has a high level computer science PhD? So yeah, we were actually a large physician group, right? In New Jersey, we have 24 offices and we staff 14 hospitals here. So I just checked the roster this morning. There's 178 radiologists on our roster right now. We run 2 radiology residencies, including the main Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School campus in New Brunswick. And, we have got a robust teleradiology arm. Again, one of Alberto's, projects for us is hooking up all these radiologists across multiple states and multiple countries, actually. We have some rads sitting in Japan and Israel doing the teleradiology. And as you can imagine, we've invested heavily into our IT infrastructure and invested in partners like Alberto to help us run the clinical arms, which is our bread and butter, the clinical arms of patient care in radiology.
Congratulations. That's a impressive presence. Seems like you're pretty easy to find University of Radiology in New Jersey, I'm sure. So as we look into this, the University of Radiology's path into AI adoption, how did you get your start in that space?
I can take that. Well, as I mentioned, CAD has been with radiology for quite some time, and it's even at the time that we purchased a gantry, it came with this CAD systems. The problem with old CAD systems is that they were not data-driven. They are like sort of segmentation techniques based on image intensity or neighborhood, some kind of minimization technique. And they were prone to a lot of false positives, right? It was a best effort at the time, but it still required the radiologist to perform considerable judgment before accepting or rejecting those results. But beyond CAD, we have been involved with natural language processing, which is a sort of machine learning for voice recognition, where all the reporting that we do, or most of them, we use voice recognition to convert voice to text. So that was also an interest point. And just to finish the thought, we also have had, not necessarily AI based, but a lot of image processing that we brought into the clinic, like ranging from 3D to specialty software to do an analysis of prostate MR or breast MR and so forth and so on. So more recently, certainly very involved with data-driven models and deep learning, but the image processing, the specialty algorithms have been present in our practice for the past 20 years. Of course, there's always an evolution, and some of these things now are folded into a PACS, but at the onset of the implementation, these were all distinct and separate codes and applications. So we have been involved with machine learning and in general with the AI field from at least 20 years. And so that's how, for us, looking into data-driven models now is just a natural evolution of a process that started way back then.
Yeah, and from the radiologist clinical side, agreeing with Alberto, for 2 decades, the physician mammographers have been used to toggling on and off a simple marking system that is the form fruste, or has always, been the CAD part of artificial intelligence. And this algorithmic approach doesn't hold a candle to what's happening right now with the deep learning systems. Everything right now is improving in terms of specificity and sensitivity and all these different things. But the early programs, I would say, suffered from some clinical operational workflow problems. You would often have to launch a different app or program on your already busy workstation. You've got so many tools opened up to the radiologist. One of the jokes I always tell my patients is that, when I was young in the 80s, they were just beginning to introduce Atari and all these different things. My mom would yell at me and say, "Why are you playing computer programs? I mean, computer games. This will never get you anywhere." And here I am, really just a computer jockey at this point, with so many different programs opened up, and the expertise that I developed as a teenager is now being applied as a 53-year-old radiologist, where I can sort of multitask with all the different programs that we have. Having said that, the actual implementation of a useful artificial intelligence for us radiologists has got to be a little bit more streamlined into the tools that we already have open. I can't keep on opening 3 or 4 different tools, as pop-ups or as a different app and things like that. And so as things have evolved, as we've experimented clinically, not on Alberto's side, but clinically with artificial intelligence, that's sort of the last frontiers, how you actually implement, your tools and integrate them in your workflow. And, we think that we found an excellent partner in our current mammography AI, which is Screenpoint Medical's Transpara, right? That is a flexible tool that we seem to be able to use, not within isolated workstations and isolated programs and apps. I mean, this is something that I think is going to have success because of that flexibility and because of that integration.
Alberto, from a technology perspective about that particular tool, the Transpara tool, how has that worked on your side?
Yeah, I think one thing that we realized right at the onset of the implementation is that in addition to Transpara, we will likely and do have other tools that we're integrating into the clinical workflow. So for us, we require, even before going forward, in analyzing more and more tools that can address clinical issues, it was to build up an infrastructure that allow us not only send the data to the tools, but also to receive the results back within the radiologist's context. And so we certainly married to the Transpara 2 to what we refer as the platform server, that it's actually a logical layer that sits on top of our PACS and coordinates all the ins and outs, right? We send data through the platform server, say to Transpara for analysis, and then we get the results back into the radiologist reading space, which is primarily the PACS. It could be the voice recognition reporting system, but mostly is PACS driven. So we get those results back. And of course, the turnaround time to sending the data out and having the results back has to be super quick, because the radiologist can't afford to be waiting for the results to come back. By the time that he or she sits down to do the interpretation, the results need already to be there. They're just going to be visualized. You don't need to press a button, say process this or that, and actually comes directly to them. So for us, developing that infrastructure was critical to smooth out all the incoming information into the radiologist space. Also gives us the ability to incorporate other tools beyond the Transpara and adopt sort of best of breed, if you will, approach to buying this technology or incorporating this technology into our workflow. So that focus on the infrastructure of how to send data out and how to ingest the results back was our major concern initially. And once we had that worked out, life became easier, right? Because then we can bring the Transpara results back into the mammographer workspace, and the radiologist can toggle the results, in general, a marking followed by some overlays on and off, and even to the point that some of those results can go directly into the report as well. So facilitating not only the ingestion of the information, but improving the overall workflow. So for us, that was paramount. And beyond that, it was building with the company what's the hardware required to process the data. And what we are finding out is that many of these tools still run on CPU-based computers, but it's exciting to see as they compile these codes to take advantage of GPUs, you have that sort of boost in turnaround time for the results. So we are exactly at that juncture with Transpara today. It's very exciting that we see that evolution, even in the short time that we have adopted, we already seen these tools evolving. So very exciting stuff.
Thank you. And Dr. Yang, at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned something around the importance of, I guess it was consistency and safety, or consistency and clinical value when it comes to AI. So if you look at this particular adoption and speak on behalf of the radiologists, how has that affected your reading and affected those two goals?
Right. I think that to get to that quality level, that even consistency amongst radiologists, and so I'll take the approach that to say that when you're looking at a large enterprise like ours, and there's a quote unquote product, this patient, and obviously it's patient care. So I always hesitate to use business terms or pseudo business terms to describe this, but when you look at what your reports are going to look like. Your radiologists have a sort of a disparate experience, a disparate training. Somebody might be trained at Stanford, another person trained at Hopkins, and they actually have slightly different approaches to all these different things that they want to call back in mammography, looking for the breast cancers. Some people feel recall rates that are high are acceptable, yet the Europeans have a recall rate of quote unquote abnormal mammograms that are about a third of that of the American radiologists. So the physician-driven results can be very disparate, and they will always be. We are human beings, but with artificial intelligence, the attempt to homogenize in a good way, homogenize the product so you don't have a lot of false positives, that you don't have a lot of false negatives. That is the goal, and the early returns that I'm seeing on our implementation has been that Transpara is going to help us even out some of those highs and lows in terms of what the product looks like when we deliver that patient care, all within the standard of care. But certainly what we'd like to do is tighten those type of results. And as we all know, when the application of sort of computerized algorithms, they help human beings do that. And so to me, what we're seeing already is that product and efficiency is going to be improved with it. It's going to be in a tighter band of false positives and false negatives, and still find the cancers that we need to find. One of the things that we are currently struggling with, I think many practices are currently struggling with our manpower shortages, radiologist shortages out there, is that the volume of work is going up and the volume of work is becoming more complex. Okay, so back when I was training, we would read 15 mammograms that day, and we'd call it a day. That was a heavy load. And now, it's not unheard of to hear of workloads at 150 or 160 mammograms. Okay, and so how do you get that attention to the imaging and to the patients, to translate? And I think that the tools like artificial intelligence is definitely going to help us do that.
That seems like quite a challenge to have that type of workload, and then amid a having to have a team to support that. And I have to think for, say, other groups that are facing the same volume and headcount challenges, but might not necessarily be on as advanced on the technology side as university radiology. It's a whole other thing. But they definitely have to be considering AI adoption at this point. Do you have, based on your experiences so far, what do you think the best practices are for these groups, whether it's on the evaluation side or the team readiness side and all of those other things?
Well, I think Alberto has probably got to be all of it, right? In the end, one of the other challenges is that the concept of computer aided computer-aided detection, CAD, for mammography has been present for, again, as we said, those 2 decades. And early on, there was a additional fee that could be charged if the practice and physician utilize the technology. All of that is now built into the current mammography code. So there is no additional revenue, so to speak. So from a business standpoint, you're not going to be able to calculate a return on a quote unquote investment in AI in terms of bumps in revenue because you're utilizing it. So what you're looking at here is radiologist quality and efficiency. Those are the approaches that one should take when you're evaluating any of these AIs. Are they actually going to help the radiologist? It helps, like in Transpara's case, where there's a broad base of medical literature already on its efficacy. This is not, a promise, right, of in a small reader study of about 300 cases. That's what we typically see when you look for FDA clearance. And of course, some of the new tech doesn't even have FDA clearance just yet. So when a practice evaluates a lot of this stuff first, I think that from the clinical standpoint, they're looking at making the radiologist better, improve patient care, right? After that, you're looking at the tool. Does it actually help do that? Will it not impede workflow? This is my point about opening up another window, application, program. That's Alberto's point about delays. I can't wait another 5 minutes. I have other cases to get to. So all of these things have to be pretty seamless as we look at it. So when the product can deliver some of these things, and as we know, there are multiple competitors out there, so it's obviously highly encouraged to try to look at these products side by side. And as you look at them, you just want to see how they fit within your practice realm. When you're a small practice, I think that there's a lot of choices that you have because you don't have to outfit every single hospital. Like in our case, we had to outfit and think about every single hospital with all their disparate vendors, their disparate electronic medical records, things like that. And then every one of our offices, and how do you homogenize that for a radiologist user interface? That's exceedingly challenging because some of our hospitals, for example, will refuse to put the capital investment to purchase a certain brand that maybe the physician likes, right? Others are happy to do it, but when you get to the physician, depending upon where they sit, they have a heterogeneous, different workflow each day. We're doing our best to try to make sure that that gets minimized. There are quality issues with the physician showing up one day and opening up different programs, and then the other one, they're using a completely different set of programs. And again, all of that kind of stuff is one of the things that I think that practices need to look at to avoid AI not being adopted. Because, as we all know, when you look at the fears and some of the studies out there, the physician human being probably has a little bit of reticence saying, I'm handing the keys over to a computer right now. And when you look at, for example, an ACR study that was done recently, 95% of radiologists surveyed said that, no, the AI is not achieving its goal. We think it's inconsistent. It doesn't put out the things that we want to see, and it's definitely not ready for autonomous use. Now, I actually agree with the last one for different reasons than some of those inconsistency things. I think that the expectations of the AI have to be met with thought leaders, and that's been one of the things that I've been trying to smooth out. So when the practice looks at implementation, there's got to be a champion who says, well, this is actually what it's trying to do. It's not trying to replace the radiologist like you're reading. A lot of literature says the AI is as good as a radiologist. And the implication for the radiologist is that when you use it, the physician, the leadership of your group is looking to replace you. That's actually one of the things that we have to quell, early on. Basically say this is a tool to improve quality, to help you get through your work, to make sure that things do well. And again, so to me, one of the other things that you have to think about is that who is your physician champion to do this? Are they going to be pro AI? Obviously, if you choose a champion who is negative on AI, then it won't be implemented, it won't be installed, it won't be actually utilized. And so for me, that's some of the salient points of looking at, well, how are you going to bring this into your practice? Alberto, on the technical side?
No, yeah, I agree 100%. I think for practices that are looking to adopting AI, it's really education is a major component here. And to the point of this interview here, the image wire is a component of education that the industry can leverage on. And you did not ask me to make this plug, but it's a great, great way to get introduced to these new technologies. Also understanding what you cannot resolve all the problems at the same time. So are you looking more into detection or diagnosis? We have a bias for detection. We like to things that detect stuff. No diagnosis, we believe our physicians are great at that, and they can use help, sure, but detection, I think, is more important. Then are you interested, everybody's interested in improving quality, but beyond that, are you trying to minimize repetitive tasks? Computers are good for that. Or are you trying to triage patients to perhaps put those one at greater risk of brain bleeds and other major disease on top of the work list? So one has to define how you want to roll out the tool. And finally, I think what's extremely important and something that is unfortunately not very well spread out by our partner and vendors out there is really what's behind the scenes, what type of compromises were taken to bring this tool into the clinical practice. A good example, just leverage on the old CAD technology, that we believe part of the failure was a lot of false positives. So as we approach CAD again with data-driven models, with AI models, so how can we eliminate the false positives? So there is a lot of tuning that you can do during the training to eliminate those false positives. However, often to eliminate false positives, you also need to allow in that data set some false negatives to come through. So yes, you eliminate on one end, but you don't eliminate the false negatives. Perhaps on the screening setting makes sense, right? Because you want to eliminate those overcalls, but you need to understand there will be some undercalls that hopefully will be picked up on future screening events. But that type of education and information is not widespread. People need to try to understand and try to work with their partners to see where the compromise have taken place and roll out the technology with the expectations set from the beginning. So this is not a perfect tool. It's not a panacea. It's not going to resolve all your problems, but it's going to help you to optimize at least a facet of the issues that we have at hand. These AI tools of today, they have very narrow focus. You cannot put them in and say they're going to resolve everything. They address very specific issues, and even then, there are compromises that are built in behind the scenes. Trying to understand those compromises is critical, so the expectations are set at the right level for everybody that's using the tool. So education clearly number one in my mind when people are approaching AI and bringing that into their workspace.
Yeah, this concept that the computer, the AI will be better than the radiologist. I think Alberto, to your point with for Screenpoint Medical as an example, their goal in Europe is not to replace the human. It's just that in Europe, if a little background here in the States, you read the mammograms with a practitioner, a radiologist, and if you want a second read, some practices in the States still have still do have a second read. That's kind of up to the practice. Now in Europe, the screening mammography paradigms to find breast cancer, there are 2 radiologists required, and so when I describe one of the missions of this particular company to the radiologist, kind of helps them to understand that no, the goal was never to replace the human being. It was to say, look, here's a tool that instead of maybe 2 human readers, you can have 1 human reader and then this tool, and that you'll get the efficacy and accuracy bumps that having 2 readers that they feel strongly in, that having 2 readers in Europe with their very low recall rates achieve, right? So I think it helps to make sure the rad understands that this is going to, again, there's always this concept in AI and human readers that the AI is going to point out where I made a mistake, right? And that always makes the human reader point out when the AI is making a mistake. And Alberto, false positives, false negatives, all these things all over the place. The concept that it's a supplemental tool to enhance that human reader's ability to find those breast cancers, I think that's got to be emphasized when you're thinking about mammography AI. And again, my tincture here is installing mammography AI, given my background, my fellowship training, all that kind of stuff. And again, I think that our subspecialty in mammography is actually very well suited to this type of adoption, having used it for 20 years, et cetera, et cetera. And I, as a human radiologist, will expand upon what Alberto said. On the flip, when I look at the pulmonary embolism AI, the neuroimaging AI, once again, I see the utility. I just find that the advertisement that it is as good as a radiologist is, it falls down so many different places, and that's why, in the end, you need that physician champion, and to then sort of educate and make sure that the rad understands, the user understands what is this product actually trying to do.
So, so looking further off into the future, and AI has continued to improve, and physicians and the IT around them has continued to kind of evolve along with it. How do you expect AI impacting practices in the future? And then what would you suggest that practices should do to make sure that they are capitalizing on this evolution?
Well, for one, I believe we still have a long way to go. I think if you will, the leading AI companies out there, perhaps they have a dozen of FDA approved protocols, right? Well, we have 1,600 differential diagnoses out there. So we have a long way to go. And to really fill in that space, we ourselves offer more than 1,200 types of exams, different modalities. So I think the focus will continue to be on the image analysis, on the workflow, triage. But there are other areas that we are very, very interested in, like protocoling images, optimizing perhaps our scheduling so we provide a better patient experience, so patients can be seen sooner rather than later just by an order of who called when. So maybe there is AI that also can look into the scheduling. We talked about work list optimization, but also business intelligence. We don't use a lot of those tools yet, and to mine some of that data and give us some insights of trends. So I think there will be a progression in what we're doing, an expansion of AI into other fields, and I'm focused mostly in radiology, but certainly in medicine in general. That evolution is going to take place. But for the foreseeable future, I still see image analysis carrying the bulk load of the development and the rollout as well. And for the reasons that we just talked about, that's where the need is. That's where there's a best fit of the AI to the current clinical needs. And I think that we're just going to follow the same sort of evolution curve that we saw with other technologies coming to the medical field, like PACS. It took like 20, 25 years for full adoption of PACS. And although we want to accelerate that with AI, I still going to think it's going to take some time to be really widespread and adopted and accepted as a useful tool for the clinical practice.
Yeah, I do see a ramp up time. As Alberto said, there are still a lot of gaps. Despite these small studies suggesting that AI is as good as a human reader, when you get to it, it was that perspective is from a certain angle. Fighting breast cancer, for example. But not quite taking care of the patient. Those kind of things. So there's a big gap, and a story from the recent RSNA. I was instructed to follow up with an AI company to see whether or not we would add that to our armamentarium of AI products that we use here in URG. I called the company. The salesperson said, I know we're getting all these accolades and people are interested in AI, but the product's not available anymore because we took it back. We shelved it in order to work on the user interface. And I think you've heard me say this throughout this talk that I think that in order to get it implemented, that user, that radiologist interface is probably equally important to the AI engine, because otherwise, we're just, again, keep it, this company shelved it themselves, let alone the radiologists not actually, actually using it. So I think that there's probably gonna be a little bit more attention paid to that as things go forward, so that once again, it's not just about the product or the FDA approval, it's actually about, okay, this is how a practice uses it, and it's actually going to work.
That's a really great insight, and the things that you just said about what to expect for the future. I mean, it made a lot of sense, and some of them feel pretty close, and some of them feel like we're gonna have to keep on working on it. But that's the fun part. And I would say that the things that I've seen University of Radiology do, and how you've evolved and kind of pushed things forward on the technology side and the clinical practice side are really impressive. So kudos to you for all you've achieved. And it seems like you've both been really busy. And Alberto, when Dr. Yang was talking about trying to coordinate across all those different hospitals and EHRs, I feel like you've been very, very busy. So good job on that. I want to thank you both for coming, and I want to just tell the audience that this is a real class organization, and you guys do great work. So if you're in the New Jersey area, this is a great company to partner with. The solutions they talked about, including Transpara, really seem to be doing something special. So, please check them out as well. Thanks for coming, guys.
Jake, thanks for having us. It was very exciting.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Pleasure to be here. Great talking to you guys.